Shaun Lewis from the Ministry for the Environment. He's got 30 minutes with you because we know there's a lot going on in government and it's of keen interest to you how the regulatory system is going to change over time. So thank you very much, Shaun. There'll be a Q&A at the end of this session, provided we've got the time remaining. So do keep pumping those questions in and I'll hope to facilitate that with Shaun towards the end of his speech. Thanks, Shaun.
Kia ora koutou. Sorry, folks, just setting up my screen here. So hopefully, can I just test, Andy, that you can see that slide, everybody?
Yes,
yep,
that's
all good.
All good. Awesome. Hey, well, thanks to SBN for the invitation to come along and talk to you all today, and kia ora to you all. Really excited, Stephanie, to see your presentation on sustainable coastlines. Obviously, Ministry for the Environment and Stats New Zealand working with you and your team and Doc for several years now. I remember the kind of those initial conversations back in about 2016 or 17. So come such a long way since then, and really love the data that you're producing, particularly around the single-use plastic bags. That was a key policy for us, getting that over the line, and nice to see that that's actually coming through in the results, which is really good. So I'm going to talk today about the policy landscape, and what I mean by that is just what's going on at the Ministry for the Environment, what's on the agenda for us coming up, and also some of the things that you may have seen already. Essentially, the policy landscape, I'll talk through these things that I've got up on the slide, but we've got a really ambitious work program to reduce waste and transition to a low carbon circular economy. It's no small task, and you'll see in when I talk about the strategy, that target is, or that the ambition kind of goes out to 2050. So it's a long-term goal. Underneath our work program, we have a number of key objectives. The first is building the foundations for a transformed waste system. So that's both kind of the physical infrastructure in terms of foundations, so physical infrastructure, but also the policy, legal and regulatory framework for a functioning system. We're expanding our investment in the waste sector, so obviously this is on the back of the increases to the waste disposal levy, which are increasing kind of year on year out to 2025. Looking at system level change, so where can we make change that impacts the whole of New Zealand rather than focusing on the smaller scale bits and pieces. We will still be focusing on some individual material streams. That kind of makes sense to think about things like plastics as one block, or construction demolition waste, for example. And the final objective is around strengthening our operational and compliance activity. Some of that, there's been a big shift in that work over the last 12, 24 months, but actually the new legislation is an opportunity for us to really beef that up and give us some useful tools in our toolkit. So if I start with the strategy, the overall vision is for a circular economy for Aotearoa New Zealand by 2050. And I know that seems like a long way away, but actually there's quite a bit to be done. And it's also not to say that there aren't programs, activities, communities that are looking at circular economy type approaches right now. So this certainly isn't a linear, we need to do the kind of the catching up now first, then the pushing ahead. Some of these things are concurrent. But our end goal is circular economy in New Zealand by 2050. And you can see the kinds of things that we're talking about there, those sub-bullet points. Alongside that, we've got a series of principles. So the principles are based on the circular circular economy principles from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation. And then we've added a few more just to reflect the uniqueness of Aotearoa New Zealand. So that's around delivering equitable and inclusive outcomes, thinking in systems, and taking responsibility for the past, present and future condition of our natural environment. We thought that was really important to reflect from a Te Ao Māori perspective, that idea of intergenerational responsibility. So the idea is that we move away from a linear or a take, make, use, dispose model towards the circular model, which is make, use, reuse and remake. Consulted on this towards the end of last year and looking to have something out mid 2022. At the same time, we're looking at the Waste Minimisation Act. So the Waste Minimisation Act is about 11, 12 years old now. And we've had some challenges, to be honest, with what's available to us through the Act, particularly around compliance monitoring enforcement, but also some of the critical tools to deliver a circular economy, such as regulatory product stewardship. So it's an opportunity for us to look at everything from the purpose and principles, roles and responsibilities, collection governance and use of levy funds, through to enhancing powers to regulate products and materials as well, which you would have seen a little bit of through the bans on microbeads and single-use plastic bags. But again, we're limited to banning materials, which can be quite limiting. And as I've mentioned before, a focus on producer duties and consumer rights is kind of central to that legislation piece as well. One of the other pieces of work that we published kind of middle to end of last year was the National Plastics Action Plan. So this came off the back of the Prime Minister's Chief Science Advisor report on rethinking plastics. There was 50-odd recommendations in that report. One of them was around having a plastics action plan for the country. So we've produced that plan now. It focuses on using less plastic, being more circular, and being better for the environment. So really that plastics action plan includes a bunch of initiatives that are already underway, and some other kind of impactful initiatives. It sets out the priorities for plastics research, innovation and investment, and informs the Plastics Innovation Fund, which I'll talk about later. As part of this work, we're also the ministry is producing a position statement on compostable plastics, which will be of interest to this group. There's been a lot of confusion around what the direction of travel is for that and how useful that is as a product. And also we're quite heavily involved in supporting international discussions towards the development of a global plastics treaty, which will no doubt have implications for us. If I move on to phasing out some of the problematic plastics. So we consulted on this policy decisions were announced in the middle of last year, had around 8,000 submissions, and over 97% of those were in favour of the phase out. So really strong support from the general public for those proposals. You can see the proposals in the image at the top there. Essentially, where we're up to is in that first phase of late 2022, getting the regulations in place to phase out and prepare for the phase out of those items being PVC meat trays, polystyrene takeaway packaging, which hopefully will help with some of the stuff that's turning up on our coastline, Stephanie. Expanded polystyrene, food and drink containers, oxygen photodegradable plastic drink stirrers, and plastic stem cotton buds. And then there's another range of materials which obviously requires some work from industry to innovate in order to get us to that point of being able to phase them out. The regulations for the first tranche ready kind of mid this year, with coming into effect around October later this year. We're in the process of developing the implementation guidance for business and industry on those products. And alongside the recommendations for the phase outs, Cabinet also directed ministry officials to get together with sector experts for ideas on expanded polystyrene, single-use cups, and wet wipes. So those groups are all active at the moment and putting together advice, which we'll take to ministers mid-2022. In terms of regulated product stewardship, quite a lot going on in this space. So in 2020, the government announced or declared 6 priority products, being those on the right-hand side: tyres, electrical and electronic products, with a focus on large batteries initially, agri-chemicals in the containers, refrigerants, farm plastics, and plastic packaging. The first 2 of those, tyres and e-waste, are well advanced. So the design working groups have been working through what those schemes will look like. And essentially this is consistent with the work that we're doing on strategy and legislation around duties of care and responsibility for products being with producers, manufacturers, and sellers of products. So essentially a product stewardship scheme is where a consumer can buy a product, but then at the end of its life, it can the consumer's got somewhere it can go back to, and somebody takes that product and disposes of it responsibly. Tyres is a classic example. It's the issue of tyres has been around for a long time. And what tends to happen is that they end up in paddocks, accumulated in paddocks, which present a number of risks, including fire hazard, which generate toxic smoke, and leachate. The Amberley tyre fire was probably the most recent example of that. So when that comes into effect, there'll be a system in place to deal with tyres from beginning to end of their lives. Next on the list is improving household curbside recycling. So this has been on the cards for quite some time, since China introduced its national sword policy and started rejecting contaminated shipments of recycling that were being sent from around the world. And it really tightened the market for recyclable products. It also kind of highlighted our dependence on overseas markets for getting rid of some of these useful resources, and has led to us looking at capacity for onshore recycling within New Zealand. But essentially the improving household curbside recycling, the idea is to capture more and divert more away from landfills and into recycling that can be made into useful products, and also to increase the quality of the recycling material. So a lot of confusion out there around whether or not you leave the bottle tops on, take them off, whether you can recycle small aluminium parts or metal parts, lids, for example, of cans in different parts of the country. And in fact, no one product is collected by every council consistently throughout the country. So there's definitely a good case for for standardising curbside. Part of those proposals is around collecting food waste as well. So there will be consultation on curbside standardisation coming up in 2022. So you'll see announcements around that. The work that we've been doing to date is around the health and safety associated with different types of collection systems, research into home composting and compostable packaging, working with Plastics New Zealand to encourage the recycling of number 5 or polypropylene packaging, and looking at markets and solutions for fibre. So there's quite a lot been going on in the background that feeds into that work. The container return scheme is something that has been on the ministry's work program for a couple of years now. So there was a co-design project. So container return is a type of regulatory product stewardship scheme, and essentially, I mean, this will be familiar to a lot of you. Back in the day when you could return glass bottles and get a deposit back on them. So this is looking at a similar type concept where you pay a deposit on every beverage container, and when you return that container to whether it's a retailer or through a vending machine or whatever, you receive a deposit. So these kinds of systems are in place all over the world, and the proposal that government is considering now is whether or not this type of system is useful for New Zealand. So again, government will be making decisions on whether to go ahead and consult on the container return scheme, likely to be mid-2022. It's quite a long lead-in time if they were to go ahead with a container return scheme to have that in place. If you think about all the infrastructure that needs to go alongside that and the behaviour change associated with that too. But just in terms of scale, the kinds of numbers that we're dealing with are similar to single-use plastic bags actually, but 2.36 billion single-use beverage containers sold into the market. This was figures from 2018-19. And at the moment, we recover somewhere between 45 and 58%. So not a huge amount of that being recovered, and probably quite a lot of leakage into the environment as well. So the intention of the CRS is that it would deal with away from home consumption, whereas curbside recycling deals with at-home consumption. And just finally, the Plastics Innovation Fund, again, part of the plastics work program, went live on the 1st of November last year. So this is money available for minimising plastic waste, supporting circular solutions, that kind of thing. It's $50 million, which comes from, partly comes from it all comes from the waste disposal levy, spread out over 4 years. We have a different process to the Waste Minimisation Fund for those of you who are familiar with that. And we have a kind of an always open principle. So receiving expressions of interest all the time and getting assessed against for eligibility, and then invitations to apply for funding beyond that. So that relatively new fund. There's small amounts of money in the first year, and those ramp up in subsequent years. I should say, I don't have a slide on this, but I should say too that we are looking at the Waste Minimisation Fund itself. So the fund at the moment is around $30 million a year, half of which goes to councils under the current legislation. And the Ministry administers the Waste Minimisation Fund with the remainder of that. That fund, with the levy changes, will increase significantly up to $250 million, $300 million a year. And we are thinking about the investment framework that sits around that and how we administer that fund more efficiently and effectively, and aligning it really strongly to the new waste strategy and the legislation. So there'll be changes to be announced around that at some point in the near future too. That's all my slides. So happy to take any questions.
Fantastic. Thanks, Shaun. It's great to see so much comprehensive work being done, and it's obviously the stuff that's kind of helping to drive the sector and drive what's going on across the country. And good to hear mention of the science advisor there as well. We've had the pleasure of their company on a few times on these masterclasses, and great to see some of that sort of sector information feeding in and getting responded to. It's a refreshing place to be, and money being spent and invested is awesome. Also, we've got a couple of questions online. We've got Brendan asks, most of this policy waste minimisation is consumer-based. How much of a problem is business commercial waste, e.g. pallet wrapping, construction, polystyrene and concrete? How's the ministry looking at that stuff?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Brendan. There is, so in the, when we're looking at organics, so I mentioned right at the start that climate is one of the slides mentioned that climate is a big driver for us in terms of our waste policies. So organics from commercial is a big deal. Construction and demolition waste. I don't know why that's hard to say. Is something that we are addressing across a number of different work streams within MFE. It hasn't been a specific work stream in and of itself, but we do have quite a lot going on, particularly in the Waste Minimisation Fund, around investing in sorting facilities in different places around the country. For those of you in Auckland, you might be familiar with Green Gorilla as a useful model. We've recently invested, not through the Waste Minimisation Fund, but through COVID Recovery and Response Fund, into a similar facility in Tauranga. So that's definitely something that's on our radar, and we are talking a lot with MB at the moment and the Construction Accord, or how we engage with the Construction Accord on the issue of construction demolition waste. So it's a big chunk. You're right, a lot is consumer focused at the moment, but there is a big piece of work coming up around commercial waste.
Cool. And construction and demolition is obviously another area that SBN's done some specific sessions on and specific work. We're still very interested in that space. So we'll be growing that with you and hopefully working alongside.
Yeah, sorry, just to add to that, Andy, as well, we've got construction demolition fills come into the levy framework from 1 July this year as well. So there'll be an uptick, I think, in infrastructure to support diversion away from those.
Awesome. Anonymous attendee, they're one of those secret people, don't want to know who they are. Said, hi Shaun, single-use coffee cups were not on the priority list, which is surprising considering the huge usage. Is there a plan to phase them out through legislation?
So I mentioned the direction from Cabinet on the plastics phase-outs was for the ministry to convene a number of expert working groups, and one of them is specifically on coffee cups. So we're looking at the moment on options for how we deal with those alongside wet wipes, which are really problematic for wastewater systems, and expanded polystyrene packaging.
Yeah.
So
cool.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, they're a constant bugbear, the coffee cup. It's just like the icon of the waste industry.
Okay. Raises my blood pressure every time I see them.
True. Sandy Botcherell asks, Kia ora, Shaun, great presentation, thank you. Just wanted to ask whether the PIF, Plastics Innovation Fund, has been oversubscribed since its launch. How have you done for takers on that one?
Yes, I think we're always oversubscribed, but the process is different to WMF, so it's a lot more interactive with the team. So when someone submits an application, there's quite a lot of toing and froing around whether or not it meets the eligibility criteria and that kind of thing, but it's definitely oversubscribed. I don't have the numbers off the top of my head. Yeah.
Oh, good to hear. Because I'm wondering if that was reference to the fact that in the past there's been sort of the idea that there wasn't enough people, there wasn't enough innovation in the system to kind of absorb all the money at one stage. Was that right? Or
I think the way that we're thinking about the Plastics Innovation Fund is building a pipeline. So we kind of got the funding reflects the fact that there's research and I guess R&D that has to happen first, which is requires less funding than commercialization, which is at the other end. So we're building the pipeline of projects that we hope will make it through to commercialization in a couple of years. So it's a slightly different approach to what we've taken in the past.
Yeah, cool. Sarah Bray asked, does MFE publish how much each council gets from the Waste Minimisation Fund?
Well, in terms of their proportion, I think, I'm not sure. I have to check that. It should be publicly available. It's essentially based on population.
Oh, makes sense.
Yeah,
makes sense. And finally, from Christine Holden, I don't know if this is for you, but it's just for a clarification. Is curbside acceptance of particular packaging considered stewardship? I think from our point of view from SBN, it depends how much engagement the company's got with it. If they're just letting the council pick it up at the other end, then that's not really stewardship. But if there's an active partnership going on, then perhaps there is. Yeah,
maybe. I mean, the definition of stewardship is, so when a product is declared a priority product, the sector has to come up with a specific scheme to address that particular product.
Oh, that makes sense. Okay, yeah. So it's not just offloading it on your local big green bin with the yellow lid.
Yeah.
And Savesh Tiwari comes in at the last minute with, what's the maximum amount a project can be allotted in the PIF? They're going large.
I can't remember off the top of my head. Can I come back to you on that one?
Yeah, or chuck a link in the Q&A. You can or answer it direct, or chuck it in the chat. I imagine that's online somewhere, but good question to scale those projects accordingly. Fantastic. Thank you, Shaun. That's awesome. I think, are you around with us at lunchtime to answer more questions? I think you may well be. That's brilliant throughout the day, because I know there'll be things that pop up, and nearly every presentation will refer to the government at some point. Thank you so much for your help, and thanks for all the work you guys are doing.
Kia ora. Thank you. Thanks for having me.